I stared at the steaming cup, a cold shiver running down my spine. The metallic smell nauseated me, a strange mix that had nothing to do with the comforting aroma of the usual coffee. Alexander was looking at me, his smile frozen, his hand resting on the table just inches from mine. Around us, conversations flowed carelessly. Camille was telling an anecdote about her last trip to Europe, her crystal-clear laughter filling the room. No one seemed to notice the tension tightening around my chest. "What's wrong, darling? You don't look well," Alexander whispered, his tone falsely concerned. He knew I had discovered his secrets. The encrypted messages on his phone, the hidden bank accounts, the late nights pretending to be at endless meetings. I had stayed silent, hoping I was wrong, hoping it wasn't what I feared. But this simple cup of coffee confirmed the worst. My trembling fingers brushed against the hot ceramic. Should I drink it? Pretend and slip away discreetly? I glanced at the clock on the wall. 0:07. 7 minutes to choose between trust and survival. I slowly spun the cup between my fingers as if savoring the moment. In reality, my heart was racing. Alexander and Camille exchanged a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance, but I caught it anyway. Was it complicity? Impatience? I thought back to all the times I had fallen ill after a meal prepared by my sister-in-law, the nights spent vomiting without understanding why. Each time Alexander was there by my side, stroking my hair, whispering that I must have eaten something bad. What if it wasn't a coincidence? I raised my eyes and met Camille's gaze, sparkling with unhealthy satisfaction. "You're not drinking?" she asked, feigning curiosity. I smiled and brought the cup to my lips, just enough to brush the liquid without swallowing a drop. It had a metallic, bitter taste, a sensation that made my palate shiver. "Delicious," I lied, setting the cup down. But action was needed, and fast. The wall clock read 0:37. My mind was already calculating the next step. Pretend to feel unwell? Spill the coffee accidentally? Discreetly switch the cups? One thing was certain. I would not be their victim tonight. The air in the room seemed to thicken, each second stretching in an invisible tension. I knew I couldn't trust appearances anymore. Alexander and Camille were playing a game whose rules I didn't fully know, but I was certain of one thing. I was their target. I shot a furtive glance at the still steaming cup in front of me. Alexander, elbows on the table, was watching me with an almost amused expectation. Camille, on the other hand, was barely hiding her impatience behind a smile that was too wide. I forced myself to laugh lightly. "Really? Such devotion." My tone was meant to be casual, but I could feel the sweat beading at the back of my neck. An idea crossed my mind. "So, I want your opinion, Camille," I said, pushing the cup toward her. "You've always been more of an expert on coffee than me. Tell me what you think." Her smile froze imperceptibly. One too many blinks, a tiny hesitation. Then she laughed, shaking her head. "Oh, but this is your moment, Claire. I wouldn't want to steal it from you." My gaze met Alexander's. A flash of annoyance passed over his features before he regained his composure. The clock read 1:05. My stomach tightened. I wasn't paranoid. They were waiting for something. But this time I was ready. Camille barely raised an eyebrow, but I saw her hand tighten slightly around the spoon. Alexander, on the other hand, offered an encouraging smile, too eager, too artificial. I let the liquid brush my lips without swallowing a drop. Its lingering scent still made my stomach turn. With calculated slowness, I set the cup back down, feigning hesitation. "It's unusual," I said cautiously. Alexander's gaze became piercing. "You don't like it?" Camille immediately intervened, her tone too light to be natural. "Maybe you're still a bit fragile from your last episode." I didn't answer. A silence settled, thick and suffocating. The clock read 1:32. Then a click in my mind. The time. The moment. I suddenly remembered an inconspicuous yet troubling detail. Every incident had occurred around the same time. A pattern I had never noticed until now. My heart raced. While I didn't yet have tangible proof, I knew it was time to act. In fact, I think I'll save it for later, I announced with a smile. I'd rather savor it slowly. Camille and Alexander exchanged a look. A shadow of frustration passed over their faces. They had just realized I suspected something. Camille put on a tight smile while Alexander simply nodded. I took a sip of my coffee, really his, before leaving the room with my phone. In the hallway my heart pounded. I had finally turned the tables. If this coffee contained something, it wouldn't be me who suffered the consequences. Settled in the office, I waited, tense. 1 minute. 2. Then a noise in the dining room. A cup set down a little too roughly. "Claire, are you okay?" Alexander called from the living room, his voice tinted with a nervousness he struggled to mask. Yes, I'll be there in a second." I stood up and quietly observed from the crack in the door. Camille was sitting rigidly, her fingers clenched around the tablecloth. Her complexion had paled. She mumbled something to Alexander, but it was too late. My trap had worked. I left the office and re-entered the room wearing an innocent smile. "So how's the coffee?" Camille brought a hand to her throat, her breath coming in short gasps. Alexander abruptly stood up, panic in his eyes. "Camille." She swayed. And I, for the first time in a long while, felt in control. I left the office door slightly ajar, straining to listen. In the dining room, a heavy silence settled. I heard the clink of a spoon against porcelain, followed by a slight throat clearing. "So how's the coffee, Claire?" Alexander said in a falsely cheerful tone. I glanced at the wall clock. The seconds dragged, heavy with anticipation. "Delicious, thank you," I replied, my voice controlled. I heard Camille take a deep breath as if she wanted to say something, but then she seemed to think better of it. Finally, a sound caught my attention. The soft clink of a cup set down on its saucer. I leaned slightly to see Camille massaging her temples, her brows furrowed. "Are you okay?" Alexander asked, concerned. I feel a bit dizzy, it's strange," he stammered. She ran a trembling hand over her forehead. My stomach clenched. Was it guilt or confirmation of my suspicions? Alexander stood up, walked around the table and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure you're all right?" I thought I saw his fingers tighten slightly. I had to act. Taking a deep breath, I pretended to re-enter the room, offering an innocent smile. "So what's new?" I said lightly, breaking the tension. The looks they gave me, filled with confusion and worry, were all I needed to know. Something or someone was tipping over. Camille took a sip, then another, before setting the cup down with an almost imperceptible sigh. I scrutinized her expression, looking for the slightest sign of discomfort. Her gaze clouded for a moment, and she ran a hand over her throat as if something irritated her. Alexander, on the other hand, observed silently, his back slightly tense. He hadn't touched his own cup yet. "Are you sure you're all right?" he asked in a tone that seemed detached. Camille blinked, brought her hand to her temple again, and then shook her head. "I don't know. I have a strange taste in my mouth." Her gaze landed on the cup, then on me. I met her stare without blinking, my heart racing. "Maybe your coffee is too strong?" I suggested innocently. Her expression changed, a shadow of doubt crossing her face. She exchanged a quick glance with Alexander, whose jaw had tightened. I felt control slipping away. If she realized what I had done, she might try to turn the tables. Suddenly she stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Excuse me for a second," she muttered, staggering slightly toward the bathroom. Alexander then turned to me, his gaze darker than ever. "What did you do, Claire?" A cold shiver ran down my spine. A heavy silence settled in the room, only disturbed by the sound of water running in the bathroom where Camille had taken refuge. Alexander slowly raised his head, his unreadable gaze fixed on me. "You knew," he whispered. It wasn't a question but a statement. My stomach twisted under the intensity of his gaze. "I had doubts," I replied in a firmer voice than I expected. "And now I'm certain." His face darkened further. He straightened up, and despite the pallor of his face, there was a flicker of anger in his eyes. "What do you think, Claire? That I wanted to kill you?" A nervous laugh escaped me. "Then explain, Alexander. Explain these episodes that only happened to me. These coincidences that pile up. This coffee that Camille suddenly seems unable to drink without discomfort." He opened his mouth but no sound came out. His silence spoke louder than words. At that exact moment, a noise echoed from the bathroom. A dull thud followed by a muffled groan. "Camille." Alexander jumped up, knocking over his chair. I hesitated for a moment before following him, my heart pounding. Whatever game they had been playing, it might have just slipped out of their hands. "It's absurd," she finally stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Dr. Lemoyne packed his notes with icy professionalism. "The analysis leaves no doubt." He looked at me with palpable seriousness. "I recommend you alert the authorities." The words seemed to trigger a chain reaction. Alexander leapt from his chair, his eyes pleading. "Claire, you can't believe that I would want to." I raised a hand, cutting him off. "Stop. Just stop." All the times I had questioned myself, thought I was paranoid, ran through my mind like a nightmarish film. Camille, meanwhile, stubbornly stayed silent, but I saw her throat tighten nervously. A thought crossed my mind, cold in its obviousness. It wasn't just him, was it? She flinched. I took a trembling breath before grabbing my phone. "It's over." With a firm hand I dialed emergency services. And the police. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but it felt like an eternity. Sitting every day in the courtroom, I watched the collapse of their plot, the damning evidence piling up against them. Alexander and Camille's behavior spoke for itself. Him unable to meet my gaze, her reduced to a shadow of herself. When the verdict was delivered, a sense of relief washed over me. I was finally free.